My name is Silva, and I work for the Argenta Historic Preservation Program. Thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome you to the Sandwiching and History tour of the Faucette-Cook Building. Before we get started, I want to thank a few people for their help with the tour today. First of all, John Chandler for allowing us to tour his building, Will Choate with the Argenta United Methodist Church, Brian and Eric Isaac with the Restaurante Capello next door, Greg and Anna Mary Thompson and Ann Rogers with Greg Thompson Fine Art upstairs, and Mike Russell with Mike Russell Photography, all for opening their spaces for us today. And of course, the wonderful staff of the North Little Rock History Commission, who's represented here, Carrie and Sandra. Thank you for your help with the building. The Faucette-Cook Building was built in 1895 and it's part of the Argenta Historic District, which was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1993. I'm going to give you the Argenta history rundown first, and then we'll talk about the 400 block of Main Street and then about this building. The city of North Little Rock was called Argenta in its early days of settlement. Thomas Willoughby Newton Sr. owned a large tract of farmland in this area, and he served as president of the Southwestern Arkansas Mining Company. Beginning in the late 1840s, Newton's mining company extracted silver and lead from the Kellogg mine, which was located about 10 miles north of Argenta. In 1866, Thomas Newton's son, Colonel Robert C. Newton, named the newly platted town Argenta because of the silver his father had mined at Kellogg Diggings, is what it was called. Argentum being the Latin word for silver. Argenta thrived because of the railroad industry. The Memphis and Little Rock Railway was the first operating railroad in the state of Arkansas, and it ran from Memphis into Argenta. The Memphis and Little Rock crossed the Fort Smith and Little Rock at a depot on 4th Street between Poplar and Magnolia, so over here. And the St. Louis, Iron Mountain, and Southern Railroad came into town along the path of what would be 11th Street, north of us by the viaduct today, and ran around the edge of town towards the Bering Cross Bridge, where it crossed the Arkansas River. The Iron Mountain Railroad shops were located west of Argenta and Bering Cross, where the shops are today, and the Memphis and Little Rock shops were located along 4th Street over here to the east of us, between Olive and Locust. And so many residents of Argenta were employed by the railroad in some capacity. Downtown buildings housed a variety of stores, restaurants, hotels, boarding houses, and saloons. Argenta was a rough town. It had no municipal government in its early days, so it was considered virtually lawless. In fact, the Arkansas Gazette often condemned Argenta, calling it, quote, calling the town a, quote, deserving candidate for a shower of brimstones. Another Gazette article from November 25th, 1880, insisted that Argenta should, quote, be incorporated or attached to Little Rock. Each train brings a number of tramps and disreputable characters to the place who should not be tolerated in any community, but unless some means are taken to police the town, they can carry things with a high head and go unpunished. Gambling was also commonplace in Argenta, leading the Gazette to dub Argenta the, quote, crap shooting center of Arkansas. Argenta residents recognized these problems, and in 1890 the citizens filed a petition to incorporate as a city of the first class. However, this attempt was quashed by Little Rock, who claimed Argenta as its 8th ward. Referencing a law that ignored the residents in the area to be annexed, the city of Little Rock laid a territorial claim on Argenta in order to increase its tax base. But Little Rock provided Argenta, then the 8th ward of Little Rock, with very, very few city services in return for their taxes. So a plot was hatched to regain Argenta's independence. William C. Faucette, a prominent businessman, 8th ward alderman, and the first mayor of North Little Rock, worked with state legislators to get the Hoxie-Walnut Ridge bill passed in 1903, which everybody else thought it was written just to let the northeast Arkansas towns of Hoxie and Walnut Ridge consolidate, which they later did. But it was also left open-ended, so that any other towns within a mile of each other, if the voters, polls of both towns voted to combine, they could do so. And so that allowed the newly incorporated town of North Little Rock, which had just been formed in 1901, supposedly to have a special school district just on the northern boundary of what was then the 8th Ward of Little Rock, to turn around and say, we're going to annex the 8th Ward. And so they took Argenta back from Little Rock. In 1906, North Little Rock changed its name back to Argenta, and it remained Argenta until 1917, whenever they voted to change it back to North Little Rock. At the urging of James P. Faucette, who thought that it would help out economically to change the name to North Little Rock, because of it, that would make it associated with the more well-known town of Little Rock. Now about the 400 block of Main. The 400 block of Main Street, as you can imagine, looked very different today than it did back then, around the turn of the 20th century. At that time, it wasn't even called Main Street. It was called Newton Avenue, in honor of Thomas Willoughby Newton Sr., whose heirs had platted the town of Argenta in 1866. The tracks of the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad ran right through the parking lot just south of the post office over here across the street. The railroad tracks came right through the parking lot, crossed over Newton Avenue or Main Street, and went right through this block just to the south of us, and continued on through the neighborhood, where they met up with more tracks and crossed the Barron Cross Bridge. So drastically different than it does today. In 1904, the Rock Island Railroad donated land over here on this corner, the southeast corner of Main and 5th, where the post office sits today, to the city for use as a public park. And the park was there until 1931, whenever they started construction on the post office. The Rock Island Railroad moved their operations over to Little Rock in 1910, so they closed the rail yard on 4th Street that they had, and there wasn't much need for the section of track that came all the way through this block. As a concession to Argenta, though, they built 2 depots, a freight depot and a passenger depot, on the north side of the river in 1913. The freight depot was located right over here in this parking lot, a little bit further back from the street, and it was torn down about 1960, and the passenger depot still stands at the corner of 4th and Hazel Streets. By 1914, most of the railroad tracks going through the neighborhood had been pulled up, making the freight depot over here the end of the line. And the 3 one-story buildings between the street building and the Faucette Brothers Bank building, if you go out and look, the buildings where Sidetracks and Starving Artist Cafe and all that are located, HDMS Architects, those were all built in the 1920s. But that gap was wide open, and that's where the tracks came through before that. And you can see, after I'm done talking, you can look at this 1914 photograph of the Elks Lodge standing out in front of these buildings, and you can see a big gap in between the two-story buildings where the tracks went. Now about this building, the street building, which is just to the south of us, was originally built between 1889 and 1892 by pharmacist George M. Street, and it housed Lamberson Hardware and the Cybeck Grocery Store. According to the Arkansas Gazette, on January 10, 1895, a fire started by a tramp sleeping in the hayloft of Mrs. Ben Austin's corn barn. That was located behind Lamberson's storeroom and also next to Cybeck's hay and horse barn, back behind the building just next door to us. This one wasn't here yet. The fire caused some damage to the street building. Meanwhile, brothers William C. and James P. Faucette, as well as road contractor Marcus D.L. Cook, they had plans to construct a, quote, magnificent 2-story brick building here on this corner. So, all that came together. Local architect J.W. Gaskell was hired to design the Faucette-Cook Building, this one, as well as a new front for the street building next door. And the street building would extend its front wall a few feet towards the street as well to make it all flush and even, and they would have uniform fronts. Work on the 2 buildings commenced at the same time. Ground was broken for the Faucette-Cook Building in late February of 1895, and by mid-March, the old front of the street building was being torn down. By mid-April, the Arkansas Gazette reported that the cornice for the street and the Faucette-Cook buildings had arrived. The buildings featured Italianate-style details, like an elaborate pressed metal cornice at the top with paired brackets below, and also hood molding above their second-story windows. In 1929, stucco was applied to the exterior of the Faucette-Cook building here. So that makes it look a little bit different than the street building next door. This one was originally brick. The Faucette brothers, William and James, were prominent Argenta businessmen, and they were the first and third mayors of North Little Rock, respectively. Marcus D.L. Cook was thing greatly needed and will lack nothing to make it a first-class entertainment hall. In 1898, the Silva grocery store shared space with watchmaker Reuben Jordan, and occupying this storefront at 421 was the post office, as well as a confectionery, a meat market, and a doctor's office. In the early 1900s, Robbins Drug Store took the place of Silva Grocery for a few years, and by 1906, they started listing 3 different addresses here in this building, 421, 423, and 425. And then many different businesses, if you can imagine, have occupied the 3 storefronts over the years, including furniture stores, drug stores, a plumbing company, sheet metal works, a liquor store, appliance dealer, realtors and attorneys' offices, an army surplus store, and a florist, among other things. 2 of the long-term occupants in this building, though, were the Argenta Garbage Company, which you can see painted on the window in the 1914 photograph, and that was here at 421 Main. That was here from 1910 until the mid-1940s. And then next door at 425, Howard's Laundry and Dry Cleaners was there from the late 30s until the mid-1950s. And then several fraternal organizations used the upstairs as a meeting hall, including the Fraternal Order of Eagles, the American Organization of United Workmen, the Benevolent Protective Order of Elks, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, who apparently had very lively dances and events upstairs, as well as illegal gambling, maybe. This building sat mostly vacant and run down in the 1980s and 90s. The Cook family sold the building in 1998, and the people who purchased it had plans to rehab it, but they never came to fruition. So, fast forward a few years, the building's in a severely deteriorated state. It was purchased by Gary Clayton, and by the time he got the building, it was already in really, really bad shape. The cool thing about this is that the Faucette-Cook Building was saved through an ordinance by the local Historic District Commission. They have rules about minimum maintenance on historic buildings here in the district, and so if they hadn't enforced that ordinance, and they had to take Clayton to court to do that, though, if they hadn't enforced that and made him maintain the building, we probably wouldn't be sitting in here today at all. Because as soon as he started working on the building, days later the entire back wall collapsed completely. So it was that close to being all the way gone. So happy ending, Clayton completed the exterior rehabilitation work on the building. John Chandler bought it about 2004 and finished all the interior work, and now it's fully occupied all spaces in the building. They're in the Argenta United Methodist Church. Next door on the first floor is Capeo, and then upstairs Greg Thompson Fine Art and Mike Russell Photography. Some interesting details to note whenever you're looking around in just a minute. On the outside, if you didn't notice the nameplates, there's a Cook and Faucette nameplates on this side that face Main Street. On the north side, Gary Clayton put up a nameplate that says Clayton 2002 to explain that one. Cook, as you walked in the front door, you noticed the Cook name in the kick plate on the threshold whenever you came in. The building also has its original cast iron columns still in the storefronts. They were just covered up. And if you see, if all of you picked up a before and after picture of the building, you can see the lower half of the front facade looked much different, and the before photo would have been extensively altered, but those columns were still underneath all of that. Also, if you look at the before photo, you can see the corner balcony, what's now the open balcony on the very corner of 5th and Main. It's closed up in the before photo. They didn't even know that was there, or that there was a corner balcony, really. So that was a surprise. They uncovered that during the restoration work on the building. The ghost sign in here on the wall is also an interesting feature of the building. The Block Brothers Tobacco Company out of Wheeling, West Virginia, and they were very well known across the country for their mail pouch chewing and smoking tobacco. And more than likely, this tobacco was sold in the grocery store, the Silva Grocery, which occupied the 419 storefront of the street building before this building was constructed. This would have been the exterior wall and a good place for an advertisement. Also, whenever we go upstairs, they have the original pressed tin ceilings are still in place upstairs. Those were manufactured by W.F. Norman Corporation of Nevada, Missouri, and they have a very intricate motif with different garlands, and in each corner is a big cameo in each corner of the pressed tin ceiling. And W.F. Norman is still in business in Nevada, Missouri, and still does painting down in the intersection that say wrong way and X, don't come this way, do not enter, and the do not enter sign is all shot up. Notice that one too, so that's horrible. But Main Street was made one way going north in 1972 to supposedly for traffic flow problems. But also because people didn't want to hang around downtown. They wanted to get the heck out of here and go home. And so, yeah, and so it was changed, it wasn't changed back to a two-way street until December of 1999. Yeah. So that, of course, encourages people to come back here and hang out downtown. It makes everything a little bit easier to access after hours, too. Does anybody have any questions before we look around?
So was Maple one that went south?
I don't know, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That would make sense for the bridge to work the right way. Yes, Joe?
Let me add, when the VFW was up here and they were having one of their shindigs, you could hear the band a block away. They really got with it. Another little footnote across the street when there was a dead end, that's where the train, France after the Second World War gave each state a railroad car full of memorabilia called the Mercy. In English they call it the Mercy train. In French, merci means thank you. And it was displayed right across the street here in Arkansas.
Okay.
It's one of the sites. I think the car wound up somewhere in the state. I don't know where it is now. I want to think it's in Helena, but I'm not sure. But that's where it was displayed in the Little Rock area. It was right across the street. Because that dead end track stayed there on that side of the street for years and years. And I didn't realize that it once went all the way through. But it stayed over there for many years. But that's probably the most important feature because they had big crowds coming to see that. I remember that as a kid when that happened.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
How could this have been an exterior in the production of this building? We're sort of like in the middle, so how is that?
No, this is here.
Sorry, I'm looking at one.
All right. This is, you're looking at this and this. This is the exterior wall of this building right here. This whole part.
So this is
Yes, and since there's not that many of us today, please do take time to come and look at that photograph from the North Little Rock History Commission. It really is interesting to kind of study that and see how everything was laid out back then, and to see the original storefronts of these buildings too, how they all looked in 1914. And once you're done with that, then we can go and work our way through the rest of the building. Also, the next Sandwiching and History tour, and I handed out some papers if you didn't get one, there's more up front. It'll be Friday, January 10th. So it's not the first Friday in January, it's just too close to the first, I thought. So it'll be the 10th, and it's at 12:30 at St. Andrew's Catholic Cathedral on Louisiana Street, downtown Little Rock. That's the different time is because they have a noon mass. So we're going to start the tour at 12:30. All right. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
It's framed in the wow, there's a lot of them.
I know how to scan it in a good way.
And this is where we are right now, and that one.
No, I don't know.
Which one of these buildings are we in right now? The 421?
From the edge, 421.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we're in the Argenta. What was the Argenta garbage company?
Okay.
Yeah, this was 1914.
There were a lot of elks back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this still a restaurant?
Oh, yes. They just don't open till the evening. Y'all just take a look around. This is Campeo. So this would have been two separate storefronts, the middle one here, and then this wall. And they opened it up. You can see they opened up the wall to connect the two storefronts. And they dug out the wine cellar That's new. Yeah. And it's tiny down there, that's why we're not, I don't know that we need to get it down there.
We don't want to see anything new.
Liability issues.
Yeah, we're not allowed to go back.
Yeah.
This is just for y'all to look around. They just got like over here. And when y'all are ready, we can go upstairs. You can look as much as you want in here, and then we can go upstairs.
So the restoration rules, I was just overhearing Carrie have a conversation with Drew saying that the more pertaining to the exterior of the building necessarily than dictating
Right.
the interior will happen.
Right.
So was this an enforcement of the law to maintain, or was this a stylistic choice that just was made? Do you know?
That was probably just a stylistic choice. And everybody's gonna be exposed brick. But usually, if you're doing a tax credit project on a building and it's not already exposed, they don't want you to expose it. They don't want you to destroy your plaster. They want you to leave the plaster. Yes. If it's not already partially exposed, they want you to leave it that way. Because historically, it wouldn't be exposed.
We've been down in that wine cellar before. Do you think it would have been food store?
That's not historic.
Oh,
They did that.
did that?
Yeah.
But that was a job.
It
Well,
was.
maybe the potatoes and things
No,
out there or something.
no, that was not there. You can look around anywhere in here. This is Greg Thompson Fine Art on this side, and they're changing exhibits, so that's why stuff is not popped up everywhere. And you can also go through that door and go into micro photography and look around in there. But notice the pressed tin ceilings on both sides, okay? And the cameos in each corner. Go into micro photography. Notice the pressed tin ceiling, and especially in the corners, the little cameo faces in each corner. Really interesting.
You can tell this floor is old, can't you?
Yeah, you sure can.